I've lost, and the comrades I've lost, won't stop hurting. It's like they're all still there.
After years of anticipation, 2015 finally brought the release of Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, the final entry in Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid saga. But with the game's release came the unfortunate realization that, even after so long, various aspects of the game appeared to be unfinished. For many people, there was something about the game that felt missing, so today I'll hopefully be clearing all of this up for you as we'll be discussing the various aspects of Metal Gear Solid 5 that were cut during development and those that were never finished in time to meet the game's release date. Metal Gear Solid 5 is comprised of 50 missions and split into 2 chapters, Revenge and Race. Revenge is comprised of the first 31 missions of the game, while Race makes up the next 19. I expected the game to really get going in its second chapter based on its preview, but in actuality, only 6 of those missions are new, while the other 13 are all recycled missions from the first half of the game with enhanced difficulty. For a chapter entitled Race, there really isn't anything to do with race within it. Instead, the story revolves briefly on a viral outbreak in Mother Base before Quiet disappears and probably dies, and Liquid runs off with a world-threatening virus, a superpowered psychokinetic kid, and Sahelanthropus looking like an orbital frame from Zone of the Enders. And then the game abruptly ends by making you play through the hour-long opening level again before revealing the game's big plot twist. It's a rushed and cobbled together conclusion that comes out of nowhere, and before you even have a chance to realize you're at the end, it's just sort of over. From what I can gather, the game's conclusion wasn't originally meant to be this sudden, because we know that at least the plotline involving Liquid, the other children, and Sahelanthropus was meant to be concluded. This would have come in the form of an additional mission tentatively titled Mission 51: Kingdom of the Flies that was included as a video with the collector's edition of the game. It details an entire chunk of the game featured on an island taken over by the kids, where they've released the deadly virus Liquid obtained, which will kill anyone who speaks English. Venom and company are able to locate all of this, and they fly in to put an end to all of it. According to the video, these cutscenes are only 30% complete, but they still look pretty damn good to me.
You don't get the last word, Father. I'll break the curse of my heritage. And to do that, first, I will kill you!
This would have led into another boss fight with Sahelanthropus that probably would have only been a slightly tweaked version of your previous fights with it. But this concept art seems to imply it would have been awesome, so I'll take its word for it. Once Liquid is defeated, Snake has a shootout where he eventually gets hit on his big dumb horn on accident, which you'd think would happen more often, that causes him to lose the ability to see the color red, which leads him to shoot Liquid by mistake. I actually like this aspect of this cutscene because it ties into how you actually do lose the ability to perceive certain colors when you sustain heavy damage during gameplay. But everything is okay because he was wearing a bulletproof vest the whole time. We get some good lines here by Liquid that definitely feel in character, but then it's revealed that he's infected with the virus he unleashed.
That's right. Don't blame yourself. Blame me.
Everyone leaves Liquid to his fate, flying away with the wreckage of Sahelanthropus, with Snake leaving a gun with 1 bullet in it for Liquid to either take revenge on him with or put himself out of his misery. The drama is short-lived though, because baby Psycho Mantis or whatever just pulls the virus out of his throat and they fly away happily ever after. No big deal, job done, that's all, no big deal. Liquid then curses the world, claiming it isn't over yet before the credits roll. Honestly, even if this was the climax of the game, I still don't think it would have been very satisfying. While it is better than what we got, it still doesn't feel like an ending to this game, just another piece of the puzzle that we're all trying to figure out even though Kojima ran off with half of the pieces. I wish this section was finished and included in the game so it would feel more complete, but it still feels like there was meant to be more to the game than what we got or was included here. People have dug through the files of the game and found this image referencing a 3rd chapter called Peace. It's weird that there are only 2 chapters to the game as it is, especially when, as mentioned before, Race really doesn't have much to do with Race at all. Maybe a lot of what was included in Race was meant to be in Peace, such as the hallucination scenes with paths that are completely in line with that theme. It just seems unfitting the way the game is structured right now. When we saw these trailers over the years, we expected what was in them, plus more, but only a handful of scenes from the game weren't shown off years in advance. In fact, there are multiple scenes from these trailers that never actually made it into the game for whatever reason. The sequence that captivated so many people, where Venom walks through the scorched town covered in burning bodies and goes nuclear, isn't in the game. Well, sort of. He falls to his knees and mourns the deaths of his soldiers that he had to kill because they were all infected with a deadly virus, but it just isn't the same. You can find a couple of burnt up bodies at one point in the game, so I guess you can simulate the scene by yourself if you want. Oh man, I sure am nuclear right now, guys. Pretty sure this awesome shot of Venom covered in blood isn't in the game, which is really weird because I expected much more imagery like this in the final game, not less. Same for these scenes that feature child soldiers that we saw in the trailers. You do see some child soldiers training during a mission like in the trailer, but these cutscenes aren't actually in the game, and I wonder where they would have shown up and what the context for them originally was. I'm wondering if this whole child soldier plotline was originally meant to make up a bigger part of the game, but it ended up getting toned down. Kojima talked a lot about tackling taboos in the game, and if he didn't do it right, he might have to leave the industry. But I really don't think there was much to the game that was controversial. Honestly, I think Ground Zeroes probably achieved this more than the main game. Speaking of Ground Zeroes, there are also scenes from the trailers set in Camp Omega, the base that Ground Zeroes featured, that showed soldiers being tortured and killed. It was planned for you to be able to return to Camp Omega if you owned Ground Zeroes at some point in the Phantom Pain, and play at least one new mission where you'd presumably see these scenes take place. To quote Kojima on this subject, he says there's something of a big feature involved. It's never been done in the games industry before, so I can't go into detail about it, but I think when you experience it for yourselves, you'll be surprised. It's something that's only possible through video games. I have no idea what he could possibly mean by that, but I'm really interested. Who knows what this place would have been like after 9 years, or why we'd even be returning there in the first place. Oh, never mind, I guess it's an online multiplayer map now instead. Great, this has never been done before. Before we move on to the next big piece of cut content, here are a few extra little things that I'd like to mention quickly. There was originally going to be an 80s filter that made the game look like films from the time Metal Gear Solid 5 takes place. They spent a long time researching the subject to make it as accurate as possible, but it was so intense that it made the game slow down, so they ended up removing it. That would have been cool to see, and apparently it's what inspired the film burn style indicators when you take damage. I'm pretty sure DD was originally going to be a Rhodesian Ridgeback as seen in several pieces of concept art and the Diamond Dogs logo itself. Same breed was featured in the original Fox Engine tech demo from 2011, and in the opening of Ground Zeroes. Would have been cool to see it somewhere in the Phantom Pain, maybe as a buddy like the concept art seems to imply, but it's a fine change because I can't really see this thing performing the kinds of moves DD can, seeing as he's, well, an acrobatic wolf, not a dog. Oh, speaking of DD, when first shown off in a demo, DD was meant to be found in the forests of Africa after hearing gunfire. You'd find them next to one of their parents that had been shot by soldiers. This is just a little interesting origin story that makes seeing DD follow you around all the sadder. This was cut from the actual game for whatever reason, and now you just sort of find them in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan.
Good.
The last real thing I want to talk about is battle gear, because I really couldn't believe this when I played the game. Basically, during the story, Huey Emmerich decides to build you this giant customizable floating death machine called the Battle Gear to try to make you like him again. This thing has several cutscenes dedicated to its development, and you can check in on it at any time. Then when it's finally developed and you're dying to take it out for a spin, the game stops you and tells you can only use it in combat deployment missions to field test it, which is just another way of telling you can't use it at all. Yeah, all this build-up and fanfare for something you can't even play with. It's fully completed but never brought up again. All you can do is look at its little icon or run around its model. In the game's official guide, we get some insight into this thing's strange inclusion. It states that originally, Battle Gear would have been able to be used by the player out in the open world, but during testing it disturbed balance, so they scrapped everything it could do except for deployment missions. This relegates it to the same function Metal Gear Zeke had in Peace Walker, but at least in that game you could customize Zeke and even watch it do battle to give you the sense that it was actually doing something. You also had to kick its ass at the end of the game. Battle Gear just sits there because they made the cutscenes and didn't want to remove them because they looked super hype. Of course it was going to be incredibly powerful, it's a giant death machine with a rail cannon. How could you pitch this idea and not know it was going to be this way until you actually made it, resulting in it needing to be scrapped? No one would have been disappointed in its removal if you didn't put it in the game's cutscenes anyway to tantalize people with the thought of using it. There are many items and costumes in the game that provide such a benefit to the player that they limit your score to compensate for the advantage. They could have easily done that for Battle Gear as well, or just limit it to free roaming or something like that. They couldn't have been that worried about it making the game too easy when they specifically created the chicken hat to let less skilled players beat missions easier. As it stands, the Battle Gear sticks out as a strange omission only because they kept in everything about it that was meant to lead up to its eventual utilization by the player. And I swear if they try to sell this to us as DLC down the line, I'm gonna lose it.
Cause I'm having deja vu here.
The sad thing is that this is probably a fraction of the content cut from the game, we just don't know about the specifics yet. All of this cut content and ambition that was never fully realized begins to build up and paint the picture of a game that was clearly unfinished and initially intended to be much more. The way the game just sort of falls apart at the end with repeated missions and plot points left in the air or hastily ended makes this clear as day. Was there meant to be more to the game than just Mission 51? I'm starting to think so. Metal Gear Solid is no stranger to cut content, but it's been over 7 years since MGS4, over 5 years since Peace Walker, over 4 years since the Phantom Pain was originally hinted at as Project Ogre, and over a year since Ground Zeroes, the retail prologue chapter used to scrounge up some extra funds, was sold to us. And we bought it, just so the Phantom Pain would be as great as possible and achieve everything it aimed to. But even then, this is what we got at the end of this journey, a game that seemed to run out of both money and time. They sold us the opening and cut out the ending. It probably would have stayed in development for several more years if Konami didn't step in and release it the way it was, regardless of what wasn't finished. Would I have kept waiting that long just so the game could be fully realized? Yes, I would have, but that just isn't realistic. Konami has almost nothing without Metal Gear, but they couldn't just keep funneling money into a title with a development that had no end in sight. I mean, they aren't Square Enix. The game already had one of the largest budgets of any game to date, even larger than MGS4, but what was Kojima Productions actually doing all this time with all that money, and how much more would it have taken to truly finish this game the way it was intended? Was Kojima putting all that money into fancy dinners with the actors he hired or what? I feel like these problems also have a negative effect on how people interpret the twist ending. Having the identity of Venom Snake revealed to actually be HyperBitHero, the legendary red-headed medic from MSF, through a mission that just sort of comes out of nowhere with no warning and has you playing through the entire prologue again, just sort of leaves a sour taste in your mouth. This would have made more sense if it was revealed after some major revelation involving Venom himself. It's as if the game awkwardly checked its watch and decided it might as well end because it had to catch a train. No one expected this game to end up like this, and while I'm able to enjoy it for the various aspects it got right, and while I still consider it to be an impressive and enjoyable gameplay experience, I just can't help but feel a bit let down by a game that was originally meant to be so much more, and I really hope you all can understand that. With the Fox engine, Kojima dreamed of creating some of the most interesting and inventive titles in recent years, but all that came from it were hopes that ended as ashes. Kojima spent most of the last generation working on titles that would never come to be, and it's a really unfortunate state of affairs. And at the end of all of it, when both parties ended up with barely anything to show for it, is it any wonder why Kojima and Konami chose to go their separate ways? I hope Kojima can go on to create new and inventive worlds in the future, worlds that he doesn't have to compromise on. But as for Metal Gear Solid 5, I wish I didn't feel this phantom pain. But that's just how it all fell into place, so for now, I'll just keep on dreaming.
I'm